Last winter, I built a fire in my backyard at 9 in the evening. I used half the wood I normally would. By 6 the next morning, there was still heat rising from the ground. Not warm, hot. A pot of water I had left on the edge of the pit the night before was still steaming when I lifted the lid. I did not do anything exotic. I did not buy anything. I did not install anything. I dug 2 holes connected by a tunnel, stacked wood a specific way, and laid a single piece of green wood across the top before I went to bed. That was it. 9 hours of sustained heat from one load of firewood in the open air with no electricity, no propane, no gadgets, and nobody watching it. What I used that night was not something I invented. It was not something I found online. It was a method documented in handwritten German on the back pages of a 1742 household manual carried across the Atlantic by a farming family that eventually settled in Pennsylvania. The same family used it for 5 generations, and the Amish communities who inherited it never stopped. Most of America never knew it existed. Tonight, you're going to learn it from start to finish. Before we go any further, let me be clear about something. Everything you are about to hear is shared purely for educational and informational purposes. This channel, Secret Sparks, exists to recover and preserve practical knowledge that has been overlooked, forgotten, or buried by modern convenience culture. Nothing in this video is intended to encourage reckless behavior. Always use common sense when working with fire. Follow your local regulations, and consult a professional if you have any concerns about your specific property or situation. This is knowledge. How you apply it responsibly is always up to you. Now let me take you back to where this actually started for me. I was in Holmes County, Ohio. It was October, late afternoon, the kind of cold that bites at your ears and makes you feel your fingers through your gloves. I had driven out to visit an Amish family I had met through a friend of a friend, someone who had mentioned almost casually that they heated their outdoor workspace through November on less wood than most people burn in a single weekend bonfire. I did not believe it at first. I had grown up building fires the way most Americans do. Big pile of split logs, newspaper underneath, matched to the bottom, tall, crackling flame reaching for the sky. That was a fire. That was how you knew it was working. The bigger the blaze, the better you felt standing next to it. What I saw that afternoon in a Holmes County barnyard rearranged everything I thought I understood about heat. The man I had come to meet, an older fellow with the kind of weathered patience that comes from decades of outdoor work, did not build a pile. He dug a hole, a simple, clean hole in flat ground, roughly a foot across at the top, about 15 inches deep. The walls were slightly angled inward toward the bottom, like a very gradual funnel. Then, about 10 inches away from that main hole, facing directly into the prevailing wind, he dug a second smaller hole, 6 inches across and 10 inches deep. Then he connected the two at the bottom with a narrow tunnel just wide enough to push your forearm through. He placed flat stones at the base of the main hole. River stones, nothing special. Then he stacked wood directly on top, lighter wood first at the top, denser hardwood at the bottom, and lit the whole thing from the top down. I watched him step back and fold his hands and just wait. Within 15 minutes, something was happening that I had never seen from a fire before. The flame was short, almost quiet, blue at the base. There was almost no smoke. And the heat coming off that pit was not rising straight into the air and disappearing the way every above-ground fire I had ever built would do. It was pouring out at ground level like the exhaust from a furnace. I held my hand 12 inches above the opening and had to pull it back. Not from flame, from pure radiant heat. He told me what I was looking at was called a draft fire pit. The English outdoors world sometimes calls it a Dakota hole, but the Amish version included refinements that the standard American camping guides had never captured. Here is the physics, and it is simpler than you might think. Cold air is pulled into that smaller side hole by the low pressure created from hot air rising inside the main pit. That cold air travels down and through the tunnel and enters the fire from directly underneath, feeding pure oxygen straight to the base of the combustion. It functions like a bellows that never stops, never needs pumping, never runs on anything but the natural difference in temperature between a cold breeze at ground level and a rising column of hot air above a buried flame. At the same time, the soil walls of the pit are doing something remarkable. They are absorbing heat during the burn and radiating it back inward. The fire is not burning in the open air, where half its energy gets stolen by the wind the moment it is released. It is baking inside an earthen chamber. The wood does not just combust. It surrenders almost every bit of energy it contains into that surrounding soil and stone, instead of sending it skyward where it does your body no good at all. I measured the ground around the pit the following morning with a cheap infrared thermometer. 8 hours after the last visible flame had gone out, the soil was still reading over 190 degrees Fahrenheit. My above-ground fire ring at home after the same overnight burn was stone cold at sunrise. The ash was already wet with dew. That single comparison told me everything I needed to know about 50 years of wasted firewood. Now let me tell you something that took me longer to fully understand, and this is the part that the post-war camping and outdoor industry actively buried, even if they never did it intentionally. After World War II, the American backyard fire became a product. Steel fire rings, prefabricated pits, propane tables, decorative patio heaters, and glossy magazine spreads showing tall, roaring blazes with sparks climbing into the dark sky. That image became the definition of a good fire in the American imagination. The taller the flame, the better. The more dramatic the blaze, the more wood you were selling, the more lighter fluid you were moving, the more propane tanks you were filling. But a tall flame is a fire that is escaping. Every inch of fire above the surface of your wood is heat, leaving your body and heading somewhere it cannot help you. The men who actually depended on outdoor fire for survival, the Amish families in Lancaster County, the Mennonite farmers in central Ohio, the old trappers who wintered in the upper Midwest, they never bought into that image because they could not afford to. Their lives and their comfort ran on wood, and wood took time to split, time to season, and time to haul. You did not waste it on spectacle. The underground draft method they preserved came originally from the German-speaking farming regions of Europe, specifically the Palatinate and areas of Switzerland. A document sometimes called the Hausvater tradition, a household management manual for German farming families dated to 1742, explicitly describes the practice of sinking a fire below ground level to maximize heat efficiency in cold weather conditions. Amish settlers carried that practice with them across the Atlantic. And unlike most early American settlers who moved quickly toward open hearths, tall chimneys, and the decorative fireplace as a status symbol, the plain communities held on to the buried fire method for outdoor work, for butchering days in late autumn, for sugaring season in early spring, for overnight watches in cold barnyards when a calf was coming or an animal was sick. They refined it over 2 centuries. They discovered that clay-heavy soil, the kind found through much of eastern Pennsylvania and central Ohio, holds heat for hours longer than sandy ground because the clay walls act as a thermal mass, slowly releasing warmth long after the flames are gone. They learned that the tunnel connecting the 2 holes needs to be angled slightly upward toward the main pit for maximum draft pull. They developed specific wood stacking methods that the mainstream camping literature never once mentioned. None of this knowledge made it into the homesteading books of the 1800s. The men writing those books were studying European aristocratic fireplace designs. They were not sitting in Amish barnyards in Lancaster County asking elderly farmers how they kept warm through January. The knowledge stayed inside the plain communities, passed from grandfather to grandson in the quiet way that practical wisdom travels when it is never written down anywhere a stranger would think to look. Now, I am going to walk you through exactly how to build this in your own backyard. And before you assume this requires open land or special tools or a permit, let me be direct. You need a shovel, a patch of bare soil at least 4 feet away from any structure, and about 45 minutes of your time. That is the whole list. Find a flat area of ground. If your yard is all grass, use your shovel to lift a small square of sod cleanly from the surface and set it aside. You can place it right back when you're done and nobody will ever know the pit was there. Dig your main hole about 12 inches across at the top and roughly 15 inches deep. As you dig, taper the walls very slightly inward as you go down, so the bottom is a little narrower than the top. That taper is what concentrates the upward flow of heat toward your hands and face instead of allowing it to bleed sideways into the surrounding soil. Now measure about 10 inches out from the edge of your main hole on whichever side faces the direction your wind usually comes from. Dig a second smaller hole there, about 6 inches across and 10 inches deep. This is your intake. Connect the 2 holes at the bottom with a tunnel. Make it just wide enough to push your forearm through comfortably. This tunnel is the engine of the entire system. Cold air coming in from outside will drop down into the smaller intake hole, travel through the tunnel and enter the base of your fire from directly underneath, where the combustion needs oxygen the most. That continuous feed of fresh air is what doubles the effective heat output from the same amount of wood you would burn in a regular pit. Once your 2 holes in the connecting tunnel are finished, line the bottom of the main pit with flat stones. River stones are ideal. Field stones work fine. Old pieces of broken brick, the kind you can find for free from any demolition site or torn down chimney, work beautifully and hold heat exceptionally well. Avoid limestone and any porous or sedimentary rock. Those can crack or pop dangerously in intense heat. Now for the wood. And this is where every American camping guide gets it completely backwards. You have probably been told your whole life that the best outdoor fire uses dense, well-seasoned hardwood like oak or hickory stacked from bottom to top. That is true for a wood stove. It is wrong for an underground draft pit. Place your densest hardwood at the bottom of the pit, directly on your stones. On top of that, layer lighter and faster burning hardwood, such as ash, beech, or well-seasoned applewood. Then add your tinder and kindling at the very top. Light it from the top, not the bottom. Top-down ignition is one of the least understood fire-building principles in mainstream American outdoors culture, and it changes everything. When you light from the top, the fire burns slowly and deliberately downward through the fuel load. Hot coals fall from the top layer onto the stones and the denser wood below. The draft tunnel feeds oxygen from underneath exactly as the coal bed forms. The wood is consumed in a slow, controlled descent, rather than a sudden explosive rush from the bottom. The result is a fire that burns almost twice as long as a bottom-lit pile of the same wood, and generates consistently more sustained heat because it is never burning faster than the system can support. Within about 15 or 20 minutes, you will notice something that surprises most people the first time they see it. The flame is short, quiet, blue at the base and almost invisible in daylight. There's essentially no smoke. Your eyes will not sting. Your clothes will not carry that campfire smell the next morning. Your neighbors may not even realize you have a fire going unless they walk directly up to your yard and look into the pit. And here is what matters most for anyone building this on an existing suburban lot. You do not have to commit to anything. When the fire is done and the ash has cooled completely, scoop the ash out, fill the holes back in with the dirt you set aside, replace the sod square on top, and your yard looks exactly the way it did before. The pit is invisible. There is no installation. There is no permanent infrastructure. There is no inspector knocking at your door. You can build it again next weekend in a completely different spot if you want to. This is, without any exaggeration, the most low-impact and high-output outdoor heating method I have ever personally tested. I ran it across 3 different states through 2 full winters before I was satisfied it worked consistently in varied conditions. But the hole itself, as remarkable as it is, accounts for only half of what I witnessed in that Lancaster County attic. The other half is the single modification that the 1742 Hausvater manual describes on its final pages. The technique that one Amish family used continuously for 5 generations. The piece that turns a very good underground fire into a 10-hour, self-sustaining, nobody watching it, radiant heat source. After your fire has been burning steadily for about an hour and a half, locate a piece of green hardwood, freshly cut, not seasoned. Green hickory or green oak is ideal. It should be no thicker than your wrist and long enough to lay across the full opening of your pit with a few inches to spare on each side. Lay that single piece of green wood across the top of the pit, just slightly off center, not sealing the hole completely, covering roughly half the opening. That is the entire modification. 1 piece of green wood across the top. What happens next is the reason that Amish family called it the nightcap log. Green wood does not ignite immediately. It contains too much moisture. Instead, the heat rising from the pit below begins to slowly bake it from the underside. The wood steams, it sweats. Over the course of several hours, the underside begins to carbonize, forming a slowly thickening char layer. That char layer acts as a partial cap over the pit opening, metering the rate at which hot air can escape upward. The fire below cannot run fast because the oxygen flow is now being controlled by the gap between the green log and the pit edge. The combustion slows to a deep, controlled smolder. The soil walls and stones absorb and hold that steady heat. The wood load below does not race through its fuel all at once. It burns slow and even and deep. Then, 8 or 9 hours later, that green log, which has been slowly drying from the inside out the entire time from the heat beneath it, finally becomes part of the fuel itself. It joins the coal bed. The system uses it as a final slow release of energy, just as the original load is finishing. The family in Lancaster County who showed me this document said their grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather had all used this exact technique on cold nights when someone needed to stay warm in the barnyard for an entire watch. A calving, a sick horse, a late sugaring run. The green log went across the top, the person went inside to sleep, and the fire ran itself until morning. I tested it in my own yard the following week. I lit the fire at 9 in the evening, waited until the pit was burning steadily, then laid a piece of green hickory across the opening at around 10:30 and went inside to bed. I came back outside at 6 in the morning. There was still a glowing coal bed under the carbonized log. The soil around the pit was warm to the touch when I pressed my palm against it. The pot of water I had set on the edge of the stones the night before was still steaming. 9 hours of usable outdoor heat from a single load of wood in the open air through an October night with no electricity, no propane, no fan, no gadget, and nobody touching it from the time I went inside until the time I came back out. That is the 200-year heat secret. That is what was sitting in a wooden box in an attic in Lancaster County while the rest of America spent billions on patio heaters and decorative fire rings and propane tables that throw the majority of their heat directly into the empty sky above them. You did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was quietly pushed aside, generation after generation, while industries built themselves into fortunes, selling you a method of fire that was never designed for your warmth. It was designed for your purchase. Tonight, you got it back. Before I close, a final word on this. Everything shared in this video is for educational and informational purposes only. Results will vary depending on your soil type, local climate, wood species, and how carefully the pit and tunnel are constructed. This is a method with a long historical record, but no specific outcome is guaranteed. Always treat fire with full respect. Keep water nearby. Never build any kind of fire in dry conditions, near structures or close to dry vegetation. Your safety and the safety of your property and your neighbors always come first. Nothing here is a substitute for your own good judgment and local fire safety rules. If this video changed the way you think about something as simple as a backyard fire, do me one favor. Like this video and subscribe to Secret Sparks so you are here for what comes next. Because the next thing I am walking you through is how one Amish family keeps an upstairs bedroom at a steady 72 degrees in February without a single duct, vent, or thermostat in the entire house. And I promise you, the method involves something most American homeowners walk past every single day without once realizing what it could do for them. Go out this weekend, dig the 2 holes, connect them at the bottom, stack the wood the way I described, and when your fire is burning steadily, lay the green log across the top before you come inside. Then come back and tell me one thing in the comments. What kind of soil did you build it in? Pennsylvania clay, Texas sand, Michigan loam, red Georgia dirt? Type your soil and the time the heat finally died. That is how we build a record that the mainstream guides will never publish, one backyard at a time. Keep the fire burning low and slow. The people who held onto this knowledge for 2 centuries did it on purpose. They knew that someday the rest of us would need it back. That day is right.